Hey guys, welcome to the official launch of the Election Predictions official 2024 presidential election forecast. It's been months in the making with plenty of deliberation on which data points to include, which to omit, and how to weight them. Of course, we're still about a year out from knowing exactly who the party's nominees will be, and we don't nearly have enough polling data from reputable organizations to create reasonably accurate polling averages in several key states. That means that this forecast is nowhere near complete or comprehensive and will probably look a lot different come November 2024. However, we do have a lot of fundamental data, such as previous election results, voting patterns, turnout, and demographic data, to at least give us a foundation for which we can analyze how these races lean, and to keep track of how these projected margins and classifications shift over time. In today's video, I'll be taking you through the methodology behind my forecast, and give some insight into how I anticipate this forecast developing over the coming year and a half. Then, in a separate video, I'll translate this data over to a more human-readable, so to speak, electoral college map, where we'll take a first look at my forecast's initial electoral college vote prediction. So keep an eye out for that one. Now, before we dive in, if you're new here, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel down below and hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. The 2024 presidential election cycle is heating up, and I have all kinds of analysis, election nights, and electoral college map predictions coming up that you don't want to miss. Now let's get into today's video. Alrighty, let's dive into the forecast. To begin, all of the data here to the left of this black divider are the projected outputs of the forecast model itself. This includes the projected margin of victory for Democrats or Republicans, and a race rating based on that margin. Negative margins favor Democrats, and those that are positive favor Republicans. That's just for calculation's sake to separate the two of them. You can also just use the colors. Now, this far out from the election, those ratings are classified into groups as follows. Safe, or solid states, are those with margins above 12% in either direction. Likely states fall between 7 to 12 points. Lean states are between 2 to 7 points, and tilt states are between 0 to 2 points. The range of those margins will probably decrease as we get closer to the election, and we can start to feel more confident in the data itself. Now, something I wanted to include in my forecast this time around, and something you're probably not going to see on many other forecasts out there, is projected vote totals for each party based on estimated turnout in each state. I do have a separate tab for my voter turnout calculator, as you can see here, which, based on previous election year turnout, population shifts, and year-over-year changes, spits out an estimated turnout number that you can see in this column. Of course, some states are growing at faster rates than others, and some are seeing upward trends in how many people are voting as a result of increased access to early voting and mail-in ballot methods. All of that is reflected in these projected outputs. I also have a calculator which projects how much of the vote third-party candidates will get in every state based on previous election data. Now, my own expectation right now is that if it is indeed a Trump vs. Biden rematch in 2024, third-party voting will probably be pretty high, and that will likely be reflected in polling data if that is indeed the case. But generally speaking, some states have a tendency to vote for third-party candidates at higher rates than others, and that is reflected here in this column. Meanwhile, the estimated share of the vote for the Dem and GOP nominees is of course based on the projected margin here, and that third-party total is subtracted from that. So that's the overview of this section, which is probably what most of you care about anyways, at least the ones who just want to know the projected outcome and are not especially interested in the data that goes into it. And that's fine, no judgment here. For those of you who are interested in how these numbers are determined, I am happy to go through them here. We'll start from left to right. This whole section here is what I call new and always updating data. This will be the section that, as we get more timely information, will continue to improve and make the forecast more accurate over time. It includes Biden's approval ratings state by state, polling data where available in each state, and a tracking of the national popular vote, which works as the national environment prior for this model, as shifts in the national vote are reflected evenly across every state. As of right now, I've only been able to find reliable approval rating data on a state-by-state basis from Race to the White House and Morning Consult. So if you guys know of any other sites that track this data, or track any of the data, actually, that you see in this forecast, which I have not already included, please do link them below. This is where you as viewers can help improve the model as well. It's a collaborative effort. For polling, I've included the most recent B or better graded poll in every state I could find one for in 2024. Those grades are according to 538, as well as Race to the White House's polling average. Something new I'm doing this year as a result of repeated polling errors in the last several cycles is that now I'm accounting for polling error and backing all polling data against fundamentals, in this case 2020's results. So, for example, in Wisconsin, the last B-rated poll, or better, in this case Marquette University, had Biden up 9 points. And Race to the White House's average, which was heavily affected by that poll, here is Biden plus 7.7. Now, you'd be a fool to believe that he would win Wisconsin, which voted for Trump by 0.7% in 2016, and then Biden by 0.6% in 2020, would vote that much in favor of Democrats. And so the weighted average is actually Biden plus 1.6, which accounts for polling error and the 2020 presidential margin, which, as far as I'm concerned, is the most comprehensive poll of public opinion that you're ever going to get in a state. That being said, the more polling data that we get from reputable organizations and companies, the more weight I will start to give the polls themselves. I did use similar logic for the national popular vote, which I backed against Biden's 4.5-point popular vote lead in 2020. That's all the data I have so far for 2024 specifically, and again, I encourage you guys to comment down below if you think I should add anything to this section. Now, this entire last section that you see here is for all of the fundamental or historical data that I have gathered that won't be changing as this cycle progresses. It accounts for all of the key election-related facts that we can use to make objective assessments on how a state is likely to vote in 2024. Simply put, these numbers have little to no potential for bias. And starting with the partisan lean scores, Cook Political Reports Voting Index is one of the industry standards for assessing this information. It calculates how strongly a state leans toward the Democratic or Republican Party compared to the nation as a whole, based on how it voted in the previous 2 presidential elections. 538's own version of this index goes a little further, taking congressional and state legislative results into account as well. They define partisan lean as the average margin difference between how a state votes and how the country votes overall. For example, if a state has a 538 partisan lean of R plus 5, that means it is 5 percentage points more Republican leaning than the nation as a whole. Put another way, in an election that is tied exactly nationally, they would expect Republicans to win that state by 5 points. Now, those 2 scores are then combined, weighted, and normalized in this column. This next subsection is all for election history. I've included the 3 most recent presidential elections, 2012, 2016, and 2020, as well as all of the Senate, gubernatorial, and House elections dating back to 2016. Now, of course, not every state held Senate and gubernatorial elections in every single election year, as terms are staggered. But all of the data that was available was then averaged out here. I've weighted these 4 averages with strong preference to presidential election results, as they are by far the most predictive of the 2024 presidential election. There are simply too many weird cases in other elections, like Vermont voting for Republican governors by 40 points, for example, and other cases where election results do not truly reflect the partisan feelings of a state, that giving too much weight to these Senate, governor, and House races would be more detrimental to accuracy than they would be beneficial. Moving on, the second to last data point I have included is margin shifts. So I've calculated how a state has trended between the 2012 and 2020 elections, and then also the 2016 to 2020 election. This gives us a good idea of which party each state has trended toward over the last few presidential elections, and serves as a valuable data point in assessing how they may shift between 2020 and 2024. Finally, we have a demographics section, more specifically the 3 demographic data points that have proven themselves most useful in predicting election results in our current political environment: race, education, and age. This white percent column shows the proportion of residents in every state that self-identify as white. The bachelor's percentage column shows the proportion of residents that have graduated from college with at least a bachelor's degree, and finally, this over 65% column displays the percentage of residents over the age of 65. Now, of course, you may be asking yourself, why are these the demographics you're including? Well, first of all, over the last decade, we've seen a major shift in both parties' electorates based on education. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, Americans without college degrees were more likely than university graduates to vote Democratic. But that gap began narrowing in the late 1960s before finally flipping in 2004, and then accelerating exponentially in the Trump era. In 1960, Democrat John F. Kennedy lost college-educated voters by a 2-to-1 margin, yet won the presidency thanks to overwhelming support among white voters without a degree. In 2020, 60 years later, Joe Biden lost non-college educated whites by a 2-to-1 margin, while securing 60% of the college-educated vote. This pattern only strengthened in 2022, largely following the conservative Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, a decision that was overwhelmingly unpopular among voters with a college degree. However, as the saying goes, for every action there is an equal or opposite reaction, and Republicans have gained significantly among voters without a college degree, specifically white Americans. Trump won non-college whites by 23 points in 2020. And so, then, given what we know about minority voters tending to support the Democratic Party, and older voters backing Republicans, I have weighted these data points to favor the GOP by a few points in states that are less educated, with a high proportion of white and older voters, while conversely favoring Democrats in less white states with a high degree of educational attainment. Now, each of these weighted outputs that you see across all of these sections have all been weighted again themselves to produce this all-encompassing final number, the projected margin of victory for each party in each state. As of right now, I have weighted election results history the highest, followed by partisan lean, then Biden's approval rating and polling data are weighted evenly, and finally demographics. Then all of these weighted averages are combined with the national popular vote projection and the weighted margin shift. So there you have it. That is the EP Official 2024 Presidential Election Forecast, version 1.0. I hope you found this informative and entertaining. Again, please feel free to leave any suggestions for how to improve the model in the comments down below. Together, we can make this the most accurate forecast out there. And as I said, stay tuned for the Electoral College map prediction video based on all of this data. That's all for today's video, though. Let me know what other videos you'd like to see in the future. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video down below and subscribe while you're at it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.